It's my pleasure to today bring two people that are part of the projects that are ongoing on more the social science aspects of antibiotics research. We will have Carl Björvang, one of our senior PhD students, and his supervisor during the PhD, Alexandra Walusewski. Although they are going to talk about quite different things. Alexandra is interested in a lot of different topics, so she's bringing today to us something that it's a little bit different than what Carl has been doing during his PhD. And then we have Carl that is going to explain his project and the results almost. He's about to defend this year, so we are very excited about that. So introducing Carl, he's been looking into the antibiotics funding situation here in Sweden in particular, and how it has changed over the decades. As you know, the problem of AMR also became more apparent. Has this affected the money that is available to do antibiotic research? And if so, how has it affected? So I will now stop sharing my screen, and Carl, I give you the floor and the screen to you to present us your work. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Eva. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
I'll show you everything, my conclusions to begin with. My name is Carl Björvang, and I have been a PhD student here at UAC for the last 4.5 years now. And as Eva said, I've been studying antibiotics research, especially the funding of it in Sweden in roughly the years 1980 to 2015. While my sort of whole project is on several aspects, one that I was thinking of sharing with you all today is the topic of earmarked money. And if the earmarking of antibiotics funds is a blessing or a curse for the field. And this earmarking, I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with the concepts that is putting money specifically to a field that is sort of locked into that field and cannot be used for any other research. We can see some examples of this in the Swedish Vetenskapsrådet, for example. Here on the screen, you see how 2013 they added 40 million, 2014 they added another 35 million, and then 2018 to 2021, altogether another 100 million that were earmarked for antibiotics research specifically. And these have been earmarked for various periods and lengths. The 2018, for example, is a 10-year national research program, while the 2021 is only a 3-year extra boost money. We can see this not just in Sweden, but internationally as well. We have the Innovative Medicine Initiative. It is largely EU-based, which, although it doesn't focus on antibiotics exclusively, is heavily geared towards antibiotics. And they, for example, in their first round had 2 billion euros, and in the second round 3.2. So there's quite a lot of this earmarked money going into the field. But what results have we actually gotten from it? Well, we can see some results in how people apply for money. This is a graph of the applications for antibiotics-related research projects at Vetenskapsrådet during the period 2005 to 2015. And here we see that in 2013, when the earmarked money came in, there was a substantial increase in the number of people applying for projects that were antibiotics related, jumping from about 90 to roughly 140. But interestingly, there were actually fewer projects that got money, and the average acceptance rates, as you can see in the numbers here, actually dropped, largely due to this increase of applications, and people seemingly caught on to this, and by 2015 numbers were down to the levels we have seen pre-boost. So it's not like just because we got extra money that everything became rosy and shiny. But we also see how specific projects come out of this earmarked money. For example, we can see the Enable project, which was based here in, largely based here in Uppsala, but with nodes all over Europe, that received a total funding of 100 million. And for that, produced one compound that has now passed phase 1 trials. Of course, there were a lot of other research going on as well, and new networks and whatnot, but this is sort of the most tangible result in terms of what we wanted out of Enable. And another outcome of these earmarked monies is UAC. Our earmarked money comes largely from the university and the rector. And here the main outcome is that we will have, hopefully by the end of the second round, produced 28 new PhDs with all the research and other things that entail. So we clearly see results. However, in my research, I have interviewed a number of researchers within the field, and they are not fully, they don't think that this has fully been a success, this earmarked money. Though, as you can see in the first quote here, I've provided some quotes to give sort of an inside flavor onto how the respondents have answered. And here in the first one, we can see that they focus on how things have gotten better. We're in a better spot now since the declaration that antibiotics resistance is an international emergency. More funding has come into the field, and there's an increased interest from outside forces in boosting the field. However, there are also those who question if this is really the way forward. For example, the second quote highlights that although they're not against money coming into the field, it's a question of, should it really be up to politicians to prioritize research? Are they the best ones to figure out which research is most needed? And of course, we are sort of grateful in our field that we have recently gotten this increase of funding. But is it the best for our field, and is it the best for medical science overall? And another aspect that was brought up was the temporarity of it. For usually this money that is earmarked is not just earmarked for the topic of antibiotics, it's also earmarked for a specific time. And having something that has been underfinanced, getting a boost might be a good thing, but is this problematic also if we see that it leads researchers to try to catch the latest fashions, that they're not able to stay in their areas and do long-term research there, but have to be flexible in their approach to fields, sort of turning their cape where the wind flows. And this raises a number of issues that have come up in my research. One of the primary ones is this longevity. Will we have to abandon our research if priorities change? Can we stay with this even if antibiotics runs out of fashion, either because it's seen as not needed anymore, which would be the sort of good scenario, but otherwise also because it's either seen as an unsolvable problem, that politicians think that they've already spent too much money on this and there have been few to little breakthroughs, so that money would be spent better on other priorities, or simply because priorities shift. For example, we don't really know how the recent COVID pandemic will hit. Will it mean that infectious diseases as a whole will get more funding, or will resources be pulled from bacterial research towards viral research because it becomes more of something that the public is aware of and that the politicians want to show that they're tackling. But this longevity question also brings up the question of opportunities. For example, we here at UAC, we are now churning out quite a number of new PhDs who are mostly focused on various antibiotics and antibacterial research fields. And the question is, will there be jobs for junior researchers if this funding goes away, or if the funding is not directed in a way that the sort of junior or middle career researchers will be able to get it, but might focus more on sort of later career or senior researchers. These are also questions that we need to ask ourselves as we progress in UAC. And there's also the question of selection. For who is this extra money good? Is it good for those who are currently researching in the field, or is the extra money mainly good for those who are sort of topic flexible in their research? For example, they might have a methodology that can be used for various research field, various diseases or medical conditions, and they will sort of switch between fields as the funding switches. And that might favor antibiotics research right now, but what happens when the sort of extra money dries up? Will they leave the field, and what impact will that research have made during that period of extra funding? And then it also brings up the necessity of earmarking money instead of giving it to sort of science as a whole. And this brings up the question, if politicians are better at prioritizing research than scientists are, and often our sort of gut response might be no, it should be scientists, but from a different perspective, it might also be that politicians, for example, have less skin in the game. Scientists might want to sort of get money for their own research rather than the research that is most needed. So there are legitimate questions concerning this. But in the end, I will not provide a conclusion or a sort of answer to this question whether earmarked money is good, because it depends. Is it a blessing or a curse? Well, that depends on how we see research and how we see academia. And there are a lot of balancing acts here to take into consideration. For example, are we willing to get more funding by giving up some freedom? If we let politicians decide where the research money should be spent, they're probably more likely to provide extra money. So is it worth it to get more money, or do we want to retain more freedom for ourselves to make the decisions about what research to conduct? And are we risk tolerant or risk averse? If we tolerate a lot of risk, then maybe earmarked money is not so bad, because, well, if that money disappears, then we'll do something else. Several of my interviewees expressed similar thought patterns, that if they don't get funding, then they have transferable skills, they'll go somewhere else. It's not a big deal. While others were risk averse. They were not willing to sort of just go where the money goes or to adapt their career. They were passionate about what they were doing and wanted to maintain their research to stay where they are. And so they expressed a lot of worry and anxiety about the potential of earmarked money flowing out of the field and what that would do for their ability to continue their research. And it also brings up the question of validation, not meaning in terms of scientific validation, but rather, where do we seek our approval? Do we seek our approval from external sources or internal sources? If we want someone to tell us you're doing good research, or you're doing research in a field that is valuable, then we are more prone towards external validation, and hence earmarked money might be good, because that indicates to us, okay, this research field is needed. This research field is special in some way. While if we, as researchers, are more seek internal validation, our own drive, our own interests, our own passions, then earmarked money might seem like someone from outside trying to impose on us what we should think, and hence creating a conflict between our internal motivation and what the external environment is telling us. And it also depends on how we see the question of antibiotics and the necessity for new treatments. Are we sort of near-term sighted, that a lot of people are actually dying today and we need new things to come onto the market soon, we need more methods and so on in the short term, or else people will die. And that is sort of motivating us. Then earmarked money might be good, because right now we are benefiting from that earmarked money. We are able to push more research. We are able to create more opportunities for new compounds, for example, or new treatment methods. Or if we see this in a more long-term perspective, we will have to endure many decades before we can sort of reach something akin to a more long-term sustainable way of dealing with bacterial infections. Then earmarked money might not be the way to go, because that will eventually at some point dry out, replaced by another field that is in fashion. And last, how do we see academia? Should we promote specialization within methods or specialization within fields? So is it good that people specialize in certain methods that can then be broadly applied to different fields, to different diseases, to tackle different issues? Or is it better that we all sort of separate into fields instead and are more method flexible within those fields? And if the first one, then earmarked money might be good, because then those people who are specialized in methods have an easier time to adapt to new circumstances, new money flowing in new ways, while field specialists will find it more daunting to try to adapt to changing situations where other fields get priority over, for example, antibiotics. So these are big questions, and I'm not supposing one or the other in any of these alternatives, but rather it is up to you to think about where you stand in these questions and what we should work towards as a system for financing research. Are we in a good place today? Is there change needed? Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your comments and questions about it.
Great. Thank you so much, Carl. Yeah, it's a topic that it incites a lot of discussion, and as you say, there's a lot of different points of views. If anybody has a question, you are welcome to raise your hand or open your camera and mic and post them, or write them in the chat, and I will read them out for Carl. But maybe we can start, as you were posing the questions and the concerns, I was wondering if you have looked into other areas where this might have happened before, and how did it go? What were the consequences for the people working in those areas? I'm not sure, something that maybe in the past was also earmarked in a way that now antibiotics research is. If you have looked into that a little bit or thought about it?
Yeah, so for example, this process of earmarking is fairly new, and in Sweden, for example, the predecessor to Vetenskapsrådet, Medicinska forskningsrådet, did their first earmarking in 1985, if I'm not mistaken, and that was for HIV research. And that persisted for at least about 10 years. And then, yeah, today we are in a better situation with HIV than we were then. And that is one of maybe the good example of an outcome where earmarking is not needed anymore, because there is a sort of solution to it at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a good example where now there is a bit less of an urgency in a sense, right? But of course, research should continue. So she wrote, thank you for the presentation. Would you like, so maybe you can pose the question, Isis, if you want.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you, Carl, for an insightful and informative presentation. So my question is, how would you explain the discrepancy now between the Swedish EMA stewardship rhetoric on supporting research versus the reality you just presented us when it comes to the earmarked money? How does there is this discrepancy? Because it is very interesting if you look at what happened before 2005, and you know quite well that in 2005, that was when the white bill on coordination of AMR stewardship really came into place. So I'm a little bit disappointed when I see how the curve goes down. So I would love to hear about your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that part of this is not so much a discrepancy as a sort of lack of understanding from funders about the sort of dynamics of research in academia. If funders, for example, thought that, okay, now we add more money, so more people will be able to do research, and there will be a higher percentage of those researching in antibiotics getting funding, then that is not exactly what turned out, because of the increased money, there were so many more applying for that research. And I don't know that the funders were sort of prepared for that relative increase in application numbers, and that would essentially mean a decrease in the acceptance rate.
The discrepancy that I am talking about is how do you join the policy? In 2005, the White Bill, regeringens proposition on how to coordinate this was tabled out. It was endorsed by the parliament, and one of the objective was to support research. So for me, when I see the figure that you presented us, it doesn't quite add up, because I see that they would have rather funded more people, I mean, to in order to come out with innovative ways of diagnostics, for instance, and so forth and so on. So, but I get the point that you just raised. So, thank you.
I think what happened, maybe, I don't know, is that it was a delayed reaction somehow, because from 2005 then until we see an increase in this earmarked money, it took a little bit of time. I feel like that's what happened. And also perhaps when that bill came out, they focused more on policy and stewardship, which I feel like sometimes is not so thought as hard research in a sense, or giving money for innovations and technologies and you know, basic research in academia as well. So maybe first they focus on putting money on you know, the policy side, and putting more people to work into finding proper stewardship reactions and guidelines or something like that. Darmet, do you want to comment on something?
Yeah, thanks, Carl, for a very nice talk. I have a couple of comments. Firstly, the focus on VR. I mean, I understand it in one sense, but I think it misses something else in the Swedish research area. And I'd make the following point, that we have the Swedish Cancer Society, which is a very major funding organization, which is specifically set up to fund cancer research. We have smaller but similar research funders in areas of diabetes, and there are others. I mean, I don't want to go through the list. No. But we have also Formas, which is also a very major Swedish funding agency, specifically focused on agriculture, soil, and water. And so what you're describing is VR, which is set up to fund basic research in all areas, biology, physics, chemistry, and them diverting some of their money to earmarked areas. But I think you shouldn't ignore the fact that in the overall infrastructure of funding in Sweden, we have for decades had focused funding into areas that particular groups of people thought were important. And that's just one comment. The other comment I would like to make concerns one of your first slides where you showed the IMI project and you mentioned Enable. And okay, so IMI is a European project. It was approximately 50% funded by us as the EU taxpayers and approximately 50% in-kind funding from a whole variety of big pharmaceutical companies. And it was specifically set up at the urging of industry, I would say. So it was never intended to be a basic research or a free research area. And the IMI funding that went into the area of antibiotics, I think Enable, you said about 100 million. I think that number varies from about 65 million up to 100, depending on how you count the industry contributions. But regardless, there were several hundreds of millions that went into the antibiotic area. Nearly all of it went towards carrying out specific clinical trials. So funding this expensive part of the research. Again, definitely not free research. This is simply trying to drive certain drugs through an expensive stage. And even the Enable project, again, a very specific remit. You mentioned one product through phase 1. The remit was to try to get a product up to phase 1 and several other products up to lead or to candidate status, and that was also achieved. And so there was never a question of doing free scientific research. And this is a decision that was taken at the very highest levels in Europe. You know, essentially the European Commission agreed with big industrial companies that it would be worthwhile to try to push this area of industrial, I think we should, or pharmaceutical research rather than just basic research. So I agree with you in the sense that I think you can definitely question the wisdom of something like VR, which is specifically set up to encourage basic research. I think you can really question the wisdom of them diverting some of their money into particular areas. When, those areas are, they're almost certainly not going to contribute to the industrial development of new antibiotics. I mean, people will work on things related to antibiotics or antibiotic resistance, but they're still going to be, by and large, academics doing basic research. And so I think I accept all of your other arguments about the wisdom or not of this and how it might affect people's research directions and whether that's good or bad in the long term. But I do think we need to separate things that have been set up with one particular purpose, like cancer research or EU-directed pharmaceutical research versus basic research in Sweden.
Yeah, definitely. To your first point, it is sort of fortunate and unfortunate that that we in this field do not see more deaths essentially yet in this area, because if we did, there might be more of these like cancer that have specific funding from the public, not from the taxpayer, but from individual donations. We should remember that a lot of these funds are often taken either from people who have died or people who have relatives or themselves suffer from long-term or chronic diseases. And unfortunately / fortunately, bacterial infections are neither usually chronic nor deadly in Sweden as of now. And to your second point, yes, definitely. Enable, for example, as part of IMI, that money was never really set aside to be basic research. However, in a larger sense, we also have to sort of debate how that money came from public funds, as you say, about 50% to begin with. So it's still money that could have been spent otherwise. And it opens another question also about how much to divide between basic research and how much to divert to more applied research. But that is a separate discussion.
We are going to go to the break soon, but I just wanted to comment that Enrico actually left a comment saying that perhaps it is not politicians alone that set the agenda and decide this earmarking, but also researchers involved making such decisions. So there is also like a bottom-up approach with a conversation and a dialogue that makes those prioritizations. And I think in a sense, it is true, like we are the ones that kind of bring to the policy action, like we need this kind of thing, this is important. And it's from the data that comes from researchers that areas become of importance, right? Like with antibiotics.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think
to
your comment.
This could also be a thing that might need to be sort of better understood or better disseminated throughout the scientific community, that it isn't some sort of anonymous politicians or other, but that we can actually influence this and do
have some say there as well. Yeah. Great. I think we're going to take a break now. What about a 12-minute break? So we join again at 1:20 to start with change to Alexandra's topic and Alexandra's presentation. And again, Carl, thank you so much for your talk, and I wish you all the luck on finishing up your projects and writing up your thesis. It's going to be an exciting time. Thank you again, and see you all back at 1:20.